Some names open every door. Others lock you inside a life you never asked for. I didn't know that the signature I scribbled across a stack of charity paperwork at 4:47 on a rainy Thursday afternoon would become the most expensive thing I had ever owned. Not because it cost me money. Because it cost me anonymity. My name is Claire Bennett. 27 years old. Public school history teacher on the east side of Chicago. White chalk dust lived on my cardigans. Coffee stains decorated more lesson plans than I cared to admit. My biggest worry that morning had been whether my students would finish their Civil War presentations before the fire drill interrupted fifth period. My world was wonderfully ordinary. Predictable. Safe. At least I believed it was. The rain had already soaked through my canvas sneakers by the time I reached the Romano Foundation building after school. The principal had asked if I could deliver a packet of grant applications before the office closed. We desperately needed funding for new library computers, and I was the unlucky volunteer willing to fight downtown traffic for the chance. The lobby looked nothing like the schools where I spent my days. Marble floors reflected golden light from towering chandeliers. Fresh lilies filled the air with a delicate fragrance that somehow made the silence feel even more expensive. Men and women in tailored suits crossed the room with quiet confidence, speaking in voices so calm they barely seemed real. I hugged my weathered messenger bag a little tighter, painfully aware that my raincoat had seen better years. A smiling receptionist handed me several forms. Just initial here, sign here, and one final signature on the last page. I barely glanced at the paperwork. My attention stayed on the clock behind her desk. 5 minutes until closing. I signed where she pointed. Thanked her. Collected my receipt. That should have been the end of it. As I turned toward the revolving doors, a deep voice echoed across the lobby. Stop her. The words weren't loud. They didn't need to be. Conversations faded instantly. Shoes stopped clicking across polished stone. Even the security guard straightened without hesitation. I froze before I realized I was obeying someone I had never met. 2 men in dark suits approached, polite enough to avoid touching me but positioned carefully so walking away no longer felt like an option. My heartbeat quickened. Is something wrong? I asked. Neither answered. Instead, every pair of eyes shifted toward the private elevator as its doors slid open with quiet precision. A man stepped out wearing a charcoal overcoat darkened by the rain. Early 30s. Tall. Broad shoulders. Dark hair brushed neatly back. White skin that contrasted sharply against the black fabric. Calm blue eyes that missed absolutely nothing. He didn't hurry. He simply walked toward me while the entire room seemed to wait for permission to breathe again. When he stopped a few feet away, his gaze dropped briefly to the folder still resting in my hands before returning to my face. Claire Bennett, he said evenly, as though confirming a fact he'd already known for hours. Yes? His expression never changed. From this moment on, he said, everyone will believe you belong to my family. I stared at him, certain there had been some impossible mistake. I'm sorry. I think you have the wrong person. For the first time, something almost resembling regret crossed his eyes. No, he answered quietly. The paperwork has already been filed. And if they discover your name before I reach you. He glanced toward the rain-covered streets beyond the glass doors. They'll reach you first. I should have walked away. Every instinct I had spent 27 years developing told me to thank the strange man for his concern, call the whole thing a misunderstanding, and disappear into the rain before my life became someone else's problem. Instead, I stayed exactly where I was, staring at him while the silence around us grew heavier with every passing second. I do not belong to your family, I said carefully. I do not even know your name. A faint smile touched one corner of his mouth, but it never reached those calm blue eyes. That is exactly what worries me. He reached toward the folder in my hands without rushing. His fingers paused long enough for me to decide whether I wanted to let go. Somehow, I did. He opened the last page, turning it toward me. My signature rested neatly above a line I had never bothered to read. Below it, embossed in elegant silver letters, was a legal acknowledgement connecting the Romano Foundation's newest educational ambassador to the Romano Family Trust. My stomach dropped. This cannot be right. It is already registered. His voice remained steady. The paperwork was processed the moment you signed it. I looked from the page back to him. Then fix it. I intend to. Good. I reached for the folder, but he closed it first. Unfortunately, correcting paperwork takes longer than creating it. Outside, rain rolled down the enormous glass windows in shimmering sheets. Headlights blurred into long streaks of white and red across the wet streets. Somewhere beyond those doors, the city continued exactly as it always had, completely unaware that mine had tilted sideways in less than 5 minutes. "Who are you?" I finally asked. He studied me for a moment before answering. "Adrian Romano." The name landed with surprising weight. Even teachers who spent their lives avoiding gossip knew the Romano name. Hospitals. Construction companies. Scholarships. Real estate. Endless charitable donations that kept appearing beside headlines no one ever seemed willing to explain. Powerful people always looked ordinary in photographs. Adrian Romano did not. He looked exactly like someone accustomed to making impossible decisions before breakfast. "If this is some publicity stunt," I said, "I am not interested." "Neither am I." "Then why am I standing here?" "Because someone wanted your name connected to mine." I frowned. Why would anyone do that? For the first time since we met, he looked genuinely uncertain. That is the question my people are trying to answer. A woman hurried across the lobby carrying a tablet. She stopped beside Adrian and whispered something too quietly for me to hear. His expression did not change, but his shoulders stiffened almost imperceptibly. He turned back toward me. "Your address has already been searched online." A chill spread through me despite the warmth inside the building. "What?" "Your teaching profile. School website. Property records. Social media." "How do you know that?" "Because my security team monitors activity connected to my family name." I laughed once, mostly because the alternative was panic. "You expect me to believe strangers are suddenly searching for an elementary school teacher because of one signature?" "Middle school," he corrected gently. "You teach 7th grade American history." My heartbeat stumbled. I had never told him that. He noticed the realization in my face and sighed almost quietly enough to miss. "Claire, I already knew everything about you before you walked into this building. The problem is that now other people do, too. And unlike me, they will not care that this happened by accident." The drive home should have taken 20 minutes. Instead, it stretched into nearly an hour because every red light gave me another excuse to stare at the windshield while rain blurred the city into soft gray watercolor. Adrian Romano's final words refused to leave my head. They will not care that this happened by accident. I kept telling myself he was exaggerating. Wealthy people lived dramatic lives. Ordinary teachers did not suddenly become the center of invisible storms simply because of paperwork. By the time I unlocked the front door of my small apartment, I had almost convinced myself everything would return to normal by morning. My golden retriever, Oliver, greeted me with the enthusiasm only dogs seemed capable of after terrible days. I knelt beside him, burying my fingers in his warm fur while the familiar scent of cedar candles and old books settled my breathing. This place had always been my safe corner of the world. A second-floor apartment with creaky hardwood floors, mismatched furniture from thrift stores, and shelves overflowing with history books my students insisted made me the biggest nerd in Illinois. I liked being predictable. I liked knowing exactly who I was when I walked through my own front door. My phone vibrated before I could even remove my raincoat. Emily, the assistant principal. "Claire, what happened today?" she asked before I could say hello. "What do you mean?" "Someone from Romano Educational Services called asking about you." My grip tightened around the phone. They did? They already approved our grant. I blinked. That is impossible. They have not even reviewed the application. Apparently they have. They doubled the amount we requested. I leaned against the kitchen counter, trying to make sense of words that no longer seemed connected to reality. There has to be a mistake. If this is a mistake, Emily laughed nervously, it is the nicest one our school has ever received. After we hung up, another notification appeared. Then another. My email inbox filled faster than I could read the subject lines. Congratulations from educational nonprofits. Interview requests. Partnership offers. Invitations to fundraising dinners I had never heard of before. Every message mentioned the same thing. Romano Foundation Ambassador. I opened my laptop with trembling hands and searched my own name. The results loaded almost instantly. There it was. Claire Bennett listed beneath an official press release announcing a new educational initiative supported by the Romano Family Trust. My photograph from the school district website smiled back at me beneath headlines I had never approved. It looked as though I had spent months preparing for a position I had accepted less than 3 hours earlier without realizing it. My front door buzzer echoed through the apartment. I jumped hard enough to spill tea across the kitchen table. Nobody visited me unexpectedly. Not on Thursday nights. Certainly not after 8 o'clock. I looked through the peephole. A young woman in a navy business suit stood quietly outside holding a white envelope. Nothing about her seemed threatening. She simply waited with remarkable patience. I opened the door only a few inches. Can I help you? She offered a polite smile. Delivery for Miss Claire Bennett. From whom? Mr. Adrian Romano. I almost closed the door. Instead, curiosity won. I accepted the envelope, thanked her, and watched her disappear down the hallway without another word. Inside was a single sheet of thick cream-colored paper. No logo. No decoration. Just one sentence typed neatly across the center. Tomorrow morning, before the rest of the city decides who you are, allow me the chance to explain why they already think you belong beside me. Sleep never really came. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my own name beneath the Romano Foundation announcement, frozen forever on a webpage that thousands of strangers could already read. By 6:30 the next morning, I had given up pretending I would rest. Chicago looked washed clean after the overnight rain. Pale sunlight reflected from puddles along the sidewalks as commuters hurried toward train stations with coffee cups warming their hands. I followed my usual routine because routines made life feel manageable. I fed Oliver. Watered the little basil plant on my kitchen windowsill. Packed tomorrow's history quizzes into my worn leather bag. For almost 15 peaceful minutes, I convinced myself I could ignore the envelope sitting on my dining table. Then my phone rang. Emily again. Her voice sounded equal parts excited and confused. Claire, there are reporters outside the school. I stopped tying my sneakers. Reporters? They want interviews about the Romano partnership. Parents are asking questions. The district office has called twice already. My pulse quickened. Tell them they have the wrong person. I tried. She hesitated. Claire, they said your appointment became official yesterday afternoon. I looked across the apartment toward the cream-colored letter. Suddenly it felt much heavier than a single sheet of paper should. 40 minutes later, I stood across the street from a quiet cafe overlooking the Chicago River. The place looked almost empty except for a few professionals working behind open laptops. I had chosen it because it was public. Bright. Safe. If Adrian Romano wanted another mysterious conversation, he could have it where everyone could see. I arrived 10 minutes early. He was already there. Sitting near the window with a simple black coffee that had barely been touched. No expensive entourage surrounded him this time. No obvious security. Just a charcoal sweater beneath a navy overcoat, reading something on a tablet as morning light reflected across the glass behind him. He looked less like the powerful businessman from yesterday and more like someone who belonged in an architecture magazine. Until he looked up. Those blue eyes carried the same quiet awareness that seemed to notice everything before anyone else did. He stood as I approached. "Thank you for coming." I almost did not. "I know." I remained standing. "I have exactly 30 minutes before I need to be at school." "Then I will not waste them." A waitress appeared almost immediately. "Your usual chamomile tea, Miss Bennett." I blinked. "I did not order anything." Adrian answered before she could. "You order it every Thursday morning at Lincoln Cafe 2 blocks from your school." My expression must have changed because he added calmly, "I asked them yesterday. I wanted you to feel comfortable." I stared at the steaming cup after the waitress left. "You keep doing things that would make any normal person uncomfortable." A faint breath escaped him that sounded almost like a laugh. "Fair observation." Finally, I sat down. "Start explaining." Adrian folded his hands on the table. "Yesterday's paperwork was not an accident. It was a trap." "For me?" "No." His voice became quieter. "For my family." The sounds of dishes and quiet conversations faded into the background as I searched his face for any sign that this was another impossible story. "Then why am I the one caught in it?" He held my gaze for several long seconds before answering with complete honesty. "Because whoever planned this understood something I did not." "What is that?" His expression hardened with unmistakable regret. "That the easiest way to reach someone carrying my last name is to give that last name to someone who never asked for it." For several seconds, I could only hear the soft clink of coffee cups and the distant hum of traffic beyond the cafe windows. Adrian had delivered his explanation with remarkable calm, as though people accidentally inheriting the attention attached to one of the most influential families in Chicago was an everyday inconvenience. I folded my hands together to stop them from trembling. "You are telling me someone used me to send a message?" "Yes." "Without ever meeting me?" "Yes." I let out a slow breath, leaning back in my chair. "Then they chose the wrong woman." Something shifted in Adrian's expression. Not surprise exactly. More like curiosity. "What makes you say that?" "Because I am giving your name back." I slid the cream-colored letter across the table toward him. "Withdraw whatever paperwork was filed. Issue a correction. Tell every newspaper they made a mistake. I do not want special treatment. I do not want interviews. I do not want to be connected to your foundation or your family." Adrian listened without interrupting. When I finished, he nodded once. If that were still possible, it would have been done before sunrise. "There is always a way." "Not this time." I frowned. "You sound very certain." He reached into his coat pocket and placed his phone on the table between us. The screen displayed half a dozen news articles, each featuring the same smiling photograph from my school website. Different publications. Different headlines. The same story. Chicago teacher named educational partner of Romano Family Trust. Community leader joins major scholarship initiative. Local educator to represent Romano Foundation across Illinois. I stared at the growing list in disbelief. This happened overnight? Most of it happened within 2 hours. My stomach tightened. People actually believe this. People believe what they repeatedly see. He paused before adding quietly, "That is why reputations are so difficult to repair." I looked out the window. Across the street, office workers hurried through the cool morning carrying briefcases and paper coffee cups, completely unaware that my ordinary life had quietly disappeared while they slept. "I still have to teach first period," I whispered more to myself than to him. Adrian followed my gaze. "And you should." I looked back at him, surprised. "You are not asking me to disappear behind security?" "No." "Stay inside one of your buildings?" "No." "Hide until this is over?" "Absolutely not." His answer came so quickly that I blinked. Why? He rested his forearms lightly on the table. Because if you surrender your routine, whoever planned this succeeds twice. I considered that. There was something strangely reassuring about hearing him say it. Every other person I imagined in his position would have tried to control every minute of my day. Adrian seemed determined to preserve it instead. There will be changes, he admitted. Some people will suddenly become unusually polite. Doors that once stayed closed may open. Invitations will appear. Favors will be offered. Because they think I belong to your family. Exactly. I shook my head. Then I will refuse them. Another faint smile appeared. I suspected you would. Before I could respond, the cafe door opened. A businessman entered carrying a leather portfolio. He glanced around the room, noticed Adrian, and immediately changed direction. He approached our table with an easy smile. Mr. Romano, it is an honor to see you again. Adrian stood politely and shook his hand. The man then turned toward me. And you must be Miss Bennet. Congratulations. I have heard wonderful things already. I had never met him before in my life. Yet he spoke as though we belonged in the same world. The conversation lasted less than a minute before he excused himself. When he walked away, I looked back at Adrian in quiet disbelief. That man does not know me. Adrian lifted his untouched coffee. No. I stared after the stranger as he disappeared toward the counter. Then why did it feel like he already respected me? Adrian's blue eyes met mine with a sadness I had not noticed before. Claire, he said softly, he was not respecting you. He was respecting the last name everyone now believes you carry. By the time I parked outside Lincoln Middle School, the morning air felt heavier than it had an hour earlier. Students crossed the parking lot in clusters, backpacks bouncing against their shoulders, laughing about weekend plans and forgotten homework. Their voices grounded me. This was my world. Locker combinations. History quizzes. Pep rallies. Not legal documents and whispered conversations about powerful families. I stepped out of my aging Honda, smoothed the wrinkles from my navy cardigan, and reminded myself that inside these brick walls I was simply Miss Bennet. Nothing more. Nothing less. That illusion lasted exactly 23 seconds. Good morning, Miss Bennet. The crossing guard smiled brighter than usual. Congratulations on the foundation appointment. I forced a polite smile. Thank you. Before I reached the front entrance, the school custodian held the door open for me with unusual enthusiasm. Big things happening for you. Inside the hallway, teachers who normally rushed toward their classrooms slowed down long enough to shake my hand. The principal appeared from his office carrying a folder against his chest. Claire, could I borrow you for just 1 minute? His voice sounded almost nervous. I followed him into his office, where 2 district administrators I had never met before were already waiting. One stood immediately. Miss Bennet, it is a pleasure. Another handshake. Another smile. Another person treating me as though yesterday's version of me no longer existed. We wanted to personally thank you, one administrator said, for helping establish what promises to become an extraordinary partnership for our schools. I opened my mouth to correct him, then stopped. Explaining the truth suddenly felt impossible. The paperwork existed. The headlines existed. Every denial sounded weaker than the evidence sitting online for the entire city to read. I appreciate your kindness, I answered carefully, choosing the safest words I could find. They exchanged pleased glances. 10 minutes later, I stood in front of 28 seventh graders, chalk in one hand, trying to explain the Constitutional Convention while pretending my life had not become unrecognizable overnight. Miss Bennet? Tyler, one of my more curious students, raised his hand. Is it true you are famous now? Soft laughter filled the classroom. I smiled despite myself. No. I am still the same history teacher who expects your homework on Monday. Another hand shot into the air. My dad saw your picture online. Mine too. Are you going to be on television? I rested the chalk on the tray and folded my arms. Here is today's history lesson. Just because something appears on the internet does not mean you understand the whole story. The room grew quiet. People can make assumptions before they know the facts. That has happened throughout history, and it still happens today. Several students nodded thoughtfully before opening their notebooks. For the next 45 minutes, life almost returned to normal. Dates. Debates. Questions about the founding fathers. I forgot about Adrian Romano completely. Then the final bell rang. As students poured into the hallway, a shy girl named Lily remained behind. She approached my desk holding a folded piece of notebook paper. Miss Bennett? Yes? She placed the paper in front of me. I just wanted to say. I hope you do not leave. My heart tightened. Why would I leave? She shrugged. Whenever teachers become important, they always leave our school. I looked at the childish handwriting covering the page. It listed reasons why she liked history class. You explain things until everyone understands. You remember everybody's birthday. You never laugh when people answer wrong. My eyes lingered on the last sentence. Please do not forget us if your new friends are richer than we are. I folded the note carefully and slipped it inside my lesson planner. At that moment, I understood something Adrian had not needed to explain. His last name had already opened doors I never wanted. But if I allowed it to change the person standing in this classroom, then I would lose something far more valuable than my privacy. The note stayed in my lesson planner for the rest of the afternoon. I must have read those 4 handwritten lines a dozen times before the final bell echoed through the empty hallways. By 4 o'clock, the school had settled into its familiar quiet rhythm. Lockers slammed one last time. The janitorial staff rolled carts through the corridors. Somewhere in the gym, a basketball bounced against polished hardwood with steady determination. I packed my books slowly, hoping ordinary routines could still drown out extraordinary problems. My phone buzzed just as I zipped my bag. Unknown number. I almost ignored it. Miss Bennett, a warm female voice asked after I answered. Yes. My name is Margaret Ellis. I oversee community outreach for the Romano Foundation. I would like to deliver several classroom donations this afternoon. I closed my eyes for a brief second. There has been a misunderstanding. The books have already arrived. Please send them back. Silence filled the line before she answered gently. There are 200 new history textbooks, 30 laptops, and enough classroom supplies for the entire 7th grade. Returning them would require several trucks. My heart sank. I did not ask for any of that. I understand. Her voice remained kind. Would you still like us to remove everything? I looked across my classroom. The faded textbooks on my shelves were older than many of my students. Several had missing covers held together with clear tape. Half the classroom computers took nearly 15 minutes to start each morning. The children deserved better than what our budget allowed. But they deserved honesty even more. Please wait outside, I finally said. I will come speak with you. 15 minutes later, I walked into the faculty parking lot and immediately spotted 2 white delivery trucks. Their logos matched the Romano Foundation emblem I had seen online the night before. Workers carefully unloaded neatly stacked boxes while Margaret, a woman in her 60s with silver hair and gentle eyes, greeted me with a welcoming smile. Miss Bennett, it is lovely to meet you. None of this should be here. She nodded. Mr. Romano expected you might say that. Of course he had. Then he also knows I cannot accept it. Margaret studied me for a long moment before speaking. May I ask one question? I folded my arms. Go ahead. She gestured toward the boxes. If every label disappeared this instant, if no one ever knew where these supplies came from, would your students benefit from them? I looked at the stacks of unopened books. New science kits. Art supplies. Musical instruments. Things our school had requested for years without success. Yes, I admitted quietly. Very much. Then perhaps this is not about pride. I shook my head. It is exactly about pride. I do not want children believing their education depends on the name of one powerful family. Margaret smiled with surprising understanding. Neither does Adrian. Hearing his first name instead of his last somehow changed the conversation. Then why send all this? She reached into her handbag and handed me a small envelope. Because he believed you would make your own decision. Inside was a handwritten note on plain white paper. No expensive stationery. No family crest. Just a single sentence written in careful script. If these gifts change who you are, send them back. If they only help children learn, then they never belonged to me in the first place. I read the words twice before looking toward the trucks again. The workers had stopped unloading. They were waiting for my answer, not Adrian's. Not the foundation's. Mine. For the first time since this impossible journey began, I realized that although his name had opened doors I never wanted, no one could force me to decide what walked through them. I stood in the parking lot holding Adrian's note while the late afternoon sun slipped between the school buildings, painting long golden shadows across the cracked pavement. The workers never rushed me. Margaret never offered another explanation. They simply waited with the quiet patience of people who understood that some decisions could not be borrowed from anyone else. I looked back toward the classroom windows where colorful student artwork covered the glass. Every drawing represented a child who deserved opportunities that had nothing to do with politics, wealth, or famous last names. I folded the note carefully and slipped it into my lesson planner beside Lily's handwritten message. Somehow the two pieces of paper belonged together. I turned to Margaret. The supplies stay. Relief softened her smile, but before she could speak, I raised one finger. Under 3 conditions. She nodded immediately. I am listening. First, nothing enters my classroom with the Romano name printed on it. Done. Second, no press conference, no photographers, and no speeches. Done. Third, nobody tells my students they owe anyone their gratitude. They earned these opportunities simply by showing up every day willing to learn. Margaret's eyes brightened. I believe Mr. Romano will appreciate hearing that. I almost laughed. He does not have to appreciate it. He only has to respect it. That evening I stayed nearly 3 hours after school organizing books with 2 volunteer teachers. We removed old torn textbooks from the shelves and replaced them with new editions that still smelled of fresh paper and ink. The laptops fit neatly along the back counter where outdated machines had struggled for years. Watching my classroom slowly transform should have filled me with uncomplicated happiness. Instead, every improvement reminded me of the strange path that had delivered it. Around 7:30, I finally carried the last empty cardboard box into the recycling bin behind the school. The parking lot had emptied long ago. A cool breeze drifted through the trees as I unlocked my car. My phone vibrated before I could open the driver's door. One new message. Adrian. Thank you for choosing the students instead of your anger. I stared at the screen for several moments before typing a reply. I did not choose you. I chose them. 3 gray dots appeared almost instantly. I know. That is why I trusted you with the decision. I slipped the phone into my pocket without answering again. The drive home felt quieter than usual. Chicago glowed beneath the first lights of evening while restaurants filled with families and office workers escaped another busy day. At a red light, I noticed a small neighborhood bookstore preparing to close. A handwritten sign in the window caught my attention. Children's book drive this Saturday. Every donation matters. Without thinking, I parked across the street and walked inside. The elderly owner recognized me from school literacy events and greeted me warmly. We spent 20 minutes discussing books my students loved before I selected several novels with my own money. As she packed the bag, she smiled. Someone called earlier asking whether anonymous donations could be made for your reading program. My stomach tightened. Did they leave a name? No. She tied the ribbon around the package. Only one instruction. They said if Miss Bennet accepts help, she must never feel like she accepted charity. I carried the books outside beneath a sky turning deep blue. For the first time since this impossible week began, I realized something that unsettled me more than the paperwork ever had. Adrian Romano was not trying to change who I was. Somehow, quietly, and without asking for credit, he kept protecting the person I had always been. Saturday mornings had always belonged to my students. Even when school was closed, I usually spent a few hours planning lessons, grading essays, or finding inexpensive books at neighborhood sales. This Saturday felt no different on the surface. The bookstore buzzed with volunteers stacking colorful paperbacks into neat towers while children wandered between shelves with the kind of excitement only stories could create. I carried in 2 reusable bags filled with novels from my own apartment. Books I had loved in college. Books that deserved more readers than one tired history teacher. Miss Bennet, the owner, called with a warm smile. You came back. I promised I would. She accepted the bags with grateful hands. These will disappear before lunchtime. I smiled, feeling lighter than I had in days. For one peaceful hour, I forgot about headlines, paperwork, and the strange gravity attached to the Romano name. I helped families choose books, recommended biographies to curious middle school students, and laughed with a little boy who insisted dinosaurs should have been included in every history class. It felt wonderfully ordinary. Then I noticed a familiar black SUV parked quietly across the street. It never pulled into the bookstore lot. No one stepped out. It simply remained there beneath the shade of an old maple tree. I knew immediately who had arranged it. I walked outside during a short break, crossed my arms, and looked directly toward the tinted windows. Within seconds, the driver's door opened. A man in a dark suit stepped out, keeping a respectful distance. Good morning, Miss Bennet. Are you following me? I asked. Protecting you. I did not ask for protection. His expression remained professional. Mr. Romano anticipated that answer. I sighed. Of course he did. Before either of us could continue, the bookstore door burst open behind me. Miss Bennet. A little girl named Sophie from my school came running toward me, proudly holding 3 books against her chest. Her mother followed close behind with an apologetic smile. I hope we are not interrupting anything. I immediately smiled back. Not at all. Sophie looked curiously toward the black SUV. Are those your friends? I glanced at the suited man before kneeling to Sophie's height. They are making sure everyone has a safe day. She accepted that explanation without another question, happily showing me the mystery novel she had chosen. After they returned inside, I stood and faced the security guard again. You see the problem? He looked genuinely puzzled. Which problem? Children should never have to wonder why someone like me has people watching from parked cars. He lowered his eyes briefly before speaking into a small earpiece. Less than 30 seconds later, his phone rang. He answered, listened quietly, then held the phone toward me. Mr. Romano would like to speak with you. I hesitated before accepting it. You have exactly 1 minute, I said. Adrian's familiar calm voice answered immediately. Then I will not waste it. Call them off. Claire. No. Listen to me this time. My students deserve normal memories. They should remember books and teachers, not security vehicles. Silence filled the line for several seconds. Finally, he spoke. You are right. I blinked. I had expected resistance. An argument. Instead, I heard him exhale softly. They will leave within 60 seconds. I looked toward the SUV. The engine started almost immediately. Thank you, I said before I could stop myself. One condition, Adrian replied. What? If you ever believe something truly feels wrong, you promise to call me before you convince yourself you can handle it alone. I watched the vehicle disappear quietly around the corner until it vanished from sight. I cannot promise that. His answer came without disappointment. Then promise you will at least think about it. I stood beneath the bright morning sun, listening to children laugh inside the bookstore. That, I admitted quietly, I can do. Monday morning arrived wrapped in crisp autumn air and a sky so clear it almost convinced me the chaos of the past week had been a dream. I parked outside Lincoln Middle School carrying my usual travel mug of coffee and a stack of graded essays balanced against my hip. The familiar rhythm of students greeting one another in the parking lot settled something inside me. Whatever had changed beyond these walls, my classroom still belonged to curiosity instead of influence. As I unlocked room 214, I noticed a large cardboard box sitting neatly beside my desk. There was no shipping label. No company logo. Just a small white envelope resting on top. My pulse quickened as I opened it. Inside was a handwritten note from Margaret Ellis. Miss Bennett, these books were purchased using donations collected from hundreds of local families after your reading program inspired them online. No contribution came from the Romano Foundation. Sometimes kindness simply follows kindness. I looked inside the box. Nearly every novel my students had requested during the past year was there. Each book contained a handwritten card from an anonymous donor wishing a child happy reading. My eyes lingered on one message that simply read, "Every child deserves one story that changes everything." Before I could think any further, students began pouring into the classroom. They immediately noticed the new collection. Excited voices filled the room as they carefully picked up books and read the titles aloud to one another. Lily approached me holding a copy of Little Women against her chest. "Did all these come because of the fundraiser?" she asked. I smiled. "They came because people decided education matters." She nodded thoughtfully before helping another student arrange books on the shelf. Watching them laugh together erased the last traces of doubt I had carried all weekend. Maybe influence itself was not the enemy. Maybe the question was always how someone chose to use it. During my lunch break, the principal knocked softly on my classroom door. "Claire, you have a visitor." I frowned. "Another reporter?" He smiled. "No. Someone waiting in the library." Curious, I followed him down the quiet hallway. The library stood almost empty except for one familiar figure browsing the history section with both hands tucked inside a navy overcoat. Adrian Romano looked strangely comfortable surrounded by shelves instead of marble offices. He glanced up as I entered but remained exactly where he was. "I asked permission before coming," he said. "Your principal agreed because I promised not to interrupt classes." "You kept your promise." He nodded toward the books lining the shelves. "My grandmother believed libraries were the only places where wealth and poverty sat at the same table." I folded my arms. That sounds wiser than most business advice. A genuine smile crossed his face. She rarely spoke about business. For a moment, neither of us said anything. The quiet rustle of turning pages from a student studying in the corner filled the space between us. Finally, I broke the silence. "The anonymous donations." Adrian looked toward a nearby bookshelf instead of at me. "Not everything generous belongs to me." "I know." I watched his expression carefully. "But you knew they were coming." He gave a small nod. "I made one phone call." "To encourage people?" "To stay out of the way." I blinked. "What does that mean?" His blue eyes met mine again, steady and sincere. "It means your students inspired the city all by themselves. I simply asked a few people not to attach my family's name to something that was already beautiful without it." For the first time since meeting Adrian Romano, I saw a man who seemed genuinely relieved not to receive credit. And somehow, that quiet act of stepping aside revealed more about his character than any display of power ever could. The conversation in the library stayed with me long after Adrian left. Not because of what he had said, but because of what he had chosen not to say. He had every opportunity to remind me how much influence his family possessed. Instead, he had quietly stepped aside so children could become the center of the story. That afternoon, while my students worked in small groups on a project about American immigration, I found myself watching them instead of grading papers. Lily patiently helped another student organize note cards. Tyler explained historical maps with more enthusiasm than accuracy, making the entire table laugh. They reminded me that real leadership rarely announced itself. It simply made room for other people to grow. When the final bell rang, I walked toward the faculty parking lot beneath a sky painted with soft orange clouds. The air smelled faintly of fallen leaves and freshly cut grass from the athletic fields. My phone buzzed before I reached my car. It was Emily. "Claire, are you busy?" "Not yet." The community center called. "They are short on volunteers for tonight's family literacy program." "I know it is last minute." I smiled without hesitation. "I will be there in 30 minutes. The community center occupied an old brick building that had served the neighborhood for generations. Folding tables lined the gymnasium, each covered with children's books, coloring pages, and simple board games. Parents sat beside their children reading aloud while volunteers moved quietly through the room offering encouragement. It was exactly the kind of place that reminded me why I had become a teacher. Halfway through the evening, an elderly man struggled to carry several heavy boxes filled with donated books toward the storage room. Before I could reach him, another pair of hands gently lifted the largest box. I looked up in surprise. Adrian. He wore dark jeans, a gray sweater, and nothing that suggested wealth or authority. No security stood nearby. No one seemed to recognize him. He simply smiled politely at the elderly volunteer. "Which room would you like these in?" For the next hour, he worked beside everyone else. He assembled bookshelves, carried boxes, and listened patiently as children proudly described their favorite stories. He never introduced himself. Never accepted special attention. Watching him from across the room felt strangely unreal. Eventually, we found ourselves arranging books on the same shelf after the families had gone home. "You did not tell anyone who you are," I said quietly. He slid another row of books into place before answering. "Tonight was not about me." I looked at him carefully. "Does your family know you spend your evenings moving library furniture?" A soft laugh escaped him. "They assume I am attending meetings." "And are you?" He looked around the nearly empty room with genuine contentment. "This feels like a much better meeting." I smiled before I could stop myself. It disappeared just as quickly when another volunteer approached us carrying a clipboard. "Excuse me," she said warmly. "Would the two of you mind standing together for a volunteer appreciation photograph?" Before I could answer, Adrian politely shook his head. "Please take one with Miss Bennett instead." The volunteer looked confused. "Are you sure?" "Absolutely." He stepped back without hesitation. "She is the reason people came tonight." After the photograph, I walked him toward the front entrance. Cool evening air drifted through the open doors as city lights flickered on across the neighborhood. "You keep stepping out of the picture," I said softly. Adrian slipped his hands into his coat pockets. "Some people spend their lives trying to be noticed." He looked toward the families walking safely to their cars before meeting my eyes once more. I spent most of mine wishing the people I cared about could live without anyone noticing them at all. The following Friday began like every other school day, but something in the air felt different. Perhaps it was the first cool breeze of the season drifting through the classroom windows, or perhaps it was the quiet certainty that life could never return to the version I had known only 2 weeks earlier. My students settled into their seats with unusual excitement because the new classroom library was finally complete. Every shelf was full. Every reading corner had a waiting list. Watching them argue cheerfully over which novel to borrow first felt like witnessing a small miracle built one thoughtful decision at a time. During lunch, the principal stopped by my classroom carrying a sealed envelope. "This arrived by courier," he said. "They insisted it be delivered directly to you." After he left, I opened it expecting another invitation or another carefully worded statement from the Romano Foundation. Instead, I found a single legal document accompanied by a handwritten note. I recognized Adrian's handwriting immediately. "Claire, this should have been done before any of this reached your life. I apologize that it took longer than it should have." I read the attached document twice before I fully understood what I was seeing. Every legal reference connecting my name to the Romano Family Trust had been officially withdrawn. The mistaken appointment had been dissolved. Public records had already been corrected. Future foundation announcements would contain an explanation acknowledging an administrative error without mentioning my name. Slowly, I lowered the papers onto my desk. The burden that had followed me every morning since that rainy Thursday had quietly disappeared. My phone vibrated almost at the same moment. One message from Adrian. "You are free again." I stared at those 4 words longer than I expected. Free again. That was exactly what I had wanted from the beginning. So why did the message leave an unexpected emptiness instead of relief? School ended beneath bright afternoon sunshine. I drove home with the windows slightly open, letting cool October air fill the car while golden leaves drifted across neighborhood streets. Everything looked wonderfully ordinary. Parents walked children home from school. Neighbors trimmed hedges before the weekend. Someone played old jazz music from an apartment balcony. My ordinary life had returned exactly as I had demanded. Yet I kept thinking about the library. About anonymous book donations. About community centers and classrooms that had quietly become better because one man never insisted on attaching his name to every generous act. That evening, as I took Oliver for our usual walk through the neighborhood park, my phone rang once more. "Adrian." I answered before I could change my mind. "I received the documents. I hoped you would." His voice sounded calmer than ever. "Everything has been corrected." "Yes." A comfortable silence settled between us. Finally, I asked the question that had been lingering in my thoughts all afternoon. "What did it cost you?" He did not answer immediately. "Claire. Please do not tell me it cost nothing." I heard him exhale softly. "Some members of my family disagreed with my decision." "Because you removed my name?" "Because I refused to leave it there simply to protect our reputation." I stopped walking. Oliver sat patiently beside me, watching squirrels race through the trees. "You chose a stranger over your family's image." "No." His answer came gently. "I chose what was right over what was convenient." The evening breeze stirred the branches above us. I looked across the park where children chased one another through piles of fallen leaves, laughing as though tomorrow had already promised to be kind. "You know," I said quietly, "I spent 2 weeks trying to prove I did not belong beside your name." Adrian remained silent. "And now?" he finally asked. I smiled to myself, watching Oliver happily wag his tail at a passing family. Now I think I was asking the wrong question. What is the right one? I looked up at the sky glowing with the last light of sunset. The question was never whether I belonged beside your last name. It was whether the man behind it deserved to stand beside mine. Some people believe life changes because of one extraordinary moment. I think it changes because of the ordinary choices we keep making after that moment has already passed. Winter arrived quietly in Chicago. The maple trees outside my classroom stood bare against pale blue skies, and my students counted the days until winter break by crossing numbers off a paper calendar taped beside the whiteboard. The classroom library never seemed empty anymore. Books constantly traveled home inside backpacks before returning a week later with folded pages marking favorite chapters. Every afternoon I watched children recommend stories to one another with the excitement usually reserved for birthdays. Those shelves no longer reminded me of confusion or unwanted headlines. They reminded me that kindness multiplied when nobody insisted on owning it. My own life had settled into something peaceful again. I was still Miss Bennett. I still drove the same aging Honda. Oliver still greeted me every evening as though I had been gone for months instead of hours. The only real difference was that I had learned not every powerful person measured success by how loudly the world applauded. One snowy Saturday morning, the community center hosted its annual family reading festival. Parents, grandparents, and children filled every room with laughter while volunteers served hot chocolate in paper cups decorated by local elementary students. I arrived early to help arrange tables, expecting another busy day surrounded by books and smiling faces. I noticed Adrian only because a little boy tugged gently on his sleeve, asking for help reaching a box on the highest shelf. Adrian smiled, lifted the box down, and spent the next several minutes helping the child build a reading corner with colorful blankets and oversized pillows. No cameras followed him. No introductions announced his arrival. Most people never looked twice. Watching him blend naturally into the crowd made me realize he had become exactly the person he once said he wished the people he cared about could be. Unnoticed. Free. Later that afternoon, as families slowly headed home carrying stacks of borrowed books, we stood together outside beneath soft snowflakes drifting through the cold air. Neither of us hurried to fill the silence. The city around us seemed calmer than it had the day we first met inside that marble lobby. "Do you ever miss it?" I asked. Adrian looked toward the neighborhood where children were carefully building a snowman beside the sidewalk. "Miss what?" "Being the man everyone watched." He smiled thoughtfully. "People still watch. They simply notice different things now." I laughed softly. "That sounds like something my history students would write in an essay." "Would they receive a good grade?" "Probably not." He laughed with me, and for a moment there were no foundations, no headlines, and no impossible misunderstandings. Just two ordinary people standing beneath a quiet winter sky. Before we left, Lily and her mother walked past us carrying an armful of library books. Lily waved enthusiastically. "See you Monday, Miss Bennett." I waved back. "Do not forget your reading log." She grinned before turning toward Adrian. "Thank you for helping with the pillows." He nodded politely. "You are very welcome." As they disappeared down the snowy sidewalk, I looked at him and finally understood why our story had never really been about a mistaken signature. A last name had opened doors neither of us expected. But character decided which ones remained open. I slipped my gloved hand into my coat pocket and smiled as we began walking toward the parking lot side by side, neither leading nor following the other. In the end, the greatest inheritance was never power, influence, or reputation. It was becoming the kind of person whose presence made other lives a little brighter. And I learned that the strongest foundation anyone could ever build was not a family name. It was earning the trust to stand beside someone without ever asking them to stand behind you.